heard the story of the pastor who, during the children's sermon, asked the children if they could tell him what Easter was all about. A little 3-year-old raised her hand and blurted out, "Oh, Easter is when we wake up early and open presents." "No," said the pastor, "that's Christmas. But you're close." A 5-year-old then said, "Easter is when we have turkey." "No, you're getting a little colder. That's Thanksgiving." The pastor was dejected, thinking about what a poor job the Sunday school teachers had done in the weeks during Lent. Finally, one young girl said, "Easter is when Jesus dies and comes out of his tomb." "That's right," said the pastor, breathing a sigh of relief. And then she said, "And if he sees his shadow, we have 6 more weeks of winter." Well, with as much snow as we've had over the last 2 weeks, before Easter, we can be forgiven if we take that joke a little more seriously than we ought to this particular year. Speaking of jokes, as I've already mentioned at the beginning of the service, one of the things that is unusual is that this year Easter falls on April Fool's Day. Now, in case some of us are not familiar with it, April Fool's Day is a day that is celebrated in the United States and in some countries in Europe, and it's really pretty much just an excuse to play tricks and pull pranks on people designed to trick and fool people in their family or in their workplace. Some typical April Fool's Day pranks include putting sugar in your family's salt shaker, or putting cellophane wrap across the toilet. Some people have gone a little bit further. They have put rubber bands or hair bands around the spray nozzle, on your sink, and so when the first person in the morning turns on the water in the sink, the spray goes right into their face. My son is looking guilty. Some go even further. They get Oreo cookies. They take them apart. They take the frosting out, and they put toothpaste in the middle of the cookies. No, I only read about that one. Then another one of my favorite, candy apples. Candy apples. We pick apples and we dip them in caramel or some other cookie or some other sweet kind of thing, and then you eat them, and they're so delicious. Think about if you were about to eat a candy apple and it turned out to be a candy onion. April Fool's Day, it's harmless, but we play a lot of jokes on each other, and here it is, not only Easter, but April Fool's Day. And as a preacher, I figured, gosh, I better try to tie them all together, because actually, you know what? This is about the only time in my lifetime that this is going to happen. The last time Easter fell on April Fool's Day was a year before I was born, 1956. And it won't happen again until 1929. Hopefully I'm still alive, but I don't know that I think I'll probably be retired by then. So this is my chance to let you think a little bit about this. The fact that Easter really is a prank that God pulled on the forces of evil. He fooled them big time. They thought that they had won the day on Good Friday. But they didn't know what was going to happen. And they got fooled into thinking that they had won and that they'd been able to put down the light that Jesus was shining through his light into the world. They got fooled, didn't they? And so on this Easter Sunday / April Fool's Day, we are here to celebrate that God pulled that prank. And we are here to celebrate and say, we were not the ones fooled. You see, there's an old saying, and the sermon title refers to this. Maybe some of you heard it. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. You see, the interesting thing is that even though it was primarily a prank on the powers of evil, it was not just those folks who got fooled on that first Easter, did they? Easter can, in some ways, make still a fool of all of us. We can get fooled in our own lives when we think that there's a situation that's hopeless, when we think that there is a way, we've come where there is no way, because with God all things are possible. And if we don't fool ourselves into thinking that we are stuck in the circumstances that we are in, we can experience the new life of Easter. Well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but like I said, Easter and April Fool's Day, they kind of fit together. You see, it's interesting because, like I said, it wasn't just the enemies of Jesus who were fooled. At first, it was the disciples, right? I mean, Peter and the disciple John, he calls himself in his gospel the one who Jesus loved, because it's sort of a he doesn't want to kind of name his own name, but it's Peter and John who run after Mary Magdalene has told them that the tomb is empty, and they run to find out what's going on, and they find that in fact it's just as Mary had said. And then they do something really strange. They go home. I mean, I guess it's like, well, there's nothing to see here. I mean, they were fooled into thinking there was nothing to see here. And Mary, at least, she stuck around. She seemed to have some kind of understanding that the empty tomb was significant in some way or another. But even she was fooled. Remember, when she sees Jesus outside of the tomb, who does she think he is? She thinks it's the gardener. She was fooled until Jesus called her by name. See, we all can get fooled. Because, like the disciples, we have this basic assumption that dead is dead, right? And you know, it's this kind of thing where we don't expect to encounter anything that goes against that assumption, right? That was what was going on for the disciples. They assumed dead is dead, just like we would, and so they're not looking for Jesus, even though he now and then had given them a few hints that was what's going to happen. It was so out of their realm of experience that they weren't looking for anyone. So they were fooled once. And we're the same way. You know, see, even though they had seen Jesus die, or in fact that was why they were having a hard time, they had seen Jesus. They had seen him being nailed to the cross. They had seen him struggling for each breath as he was there on the cross. They had heard him say, "It is finished." They had seen his lifeless body being taken down from the cross and placed in a tomb. And they knew, like I said, that dead is dead, and that was the end. And we're the same way. Dead is dead for us too, and we're not ready for bodies coming back to life. Maybe you know the story of the drunk fellow who left a bar one night and he decided to take a shortcut through the graveyard because it was raining. In fact, that night it was raining heavily and it was very dark, and as he was walking through this graveyard, he didn't notice that there was an already dug grave, and he fell in. And there he sat at the bottom of this muddy grave, trying to climb out, but the walls were too high and too muddy, and then he started yelling, "Help! Help!" And nobody heard him because for some reason no one was hanging out in the graveyard that rainy, dark night. And then he said, "Oh, I guess I'm going to have to spend the rest of the night here in this grave." Maybe somebody will rescue me in the morning. Well, as it happened, a couple hours later, another drunk fellow went out to that same bar and decided to take the same shortcut. And guess what? He fell into the same pit, the same grave. And as he was clawing his way, trying to get up, the other fellow was watching this, and he said, "No, it's no use. You'll never get out of here." But guess what? He did. You don't get the joke. He was so scared that he did. Okay. I guess I won't use that one anymore. But the point being is that we're not expecting, if we fall into a grave, to have somebody tell us you can't get out. We're not expecting somebody to come back from the dead. We're not used to that. We believe dead is dead. And some of y'all know what I mean by this, because I'll remember when my father died and when we saw him being taken out of the church after the funeral, and we weren't going to be burying him for a while. Boy, did I feel alone. I didn't want to say goodbye. And some of you know what I'm talking about. You stand at the grave and you see the casket closed, and you see that casket being brought down into the ground, and you say, my gosh, I sure would love to believe that this is the last time I'll see him. And there's part of us that, yes, oh, that's kind of a nice idea, but then there's another part of us, if you're like me, to say, oh, well, gosh, every now and then I have my doubts, and every now and then I have to be reminded, and every now and then I say, well, it sure is a nice idea, but can I really stake my life on the fact that death isn't all there is? I get fooled sometimes. You see, it's all right to be fooled once, but we don't want to be fooled twice, do we? And here's the good news. That after the disciples initially were fooled that one time, once they encountered the living Jesus, they were not fooled again. In fact, their lives were transformed. These people who could hardly put one foot in front of another suddenly become magnetic and effective witnesses of the good news of Jesus Christ. People who are fearless, even after Peter was not fearless when he denied knowing Jesus. After that, after the resurrection, his faith is resurrected, and he becomes able to be courageous to the point where he goes all over the known world telling the good news of Jesus Christ, and winds up being put to death for that. And so did some of the other apostles. All but one were killed because of their faith. The reason that they could be able to do that is because they knew that this wasn't all there is, that life is that they weren't fooled anymore, that death was the final word. You understand what I'm saying, brothers and sisters? You see, Jesus' resurrection, if we work it right, if we get through our being fooled, becomes our resurrection. It offers us new life and new hope, and that no matter what situation we find ourselves in, we understand that there is no place so dead that the resurrection power of Jesus Christ cannot bring us back to life. You might be looking for work. You may have lost your job and you're looking for work, or you may be in the aftermath of a painful divorce, or you may be in a situation where you're worried about a son or a daughter. But the good news of Easter says that no matter how dark things get, the morning's coming. See, don't forget that Easter happened in a graveyard. It happened in the dark when nobody could see anything. It happened in the midst of heartbreak. It happened in the midst of a time in the lives of the disciples when they were wondering if they had just wasted the last few years of their life. It happened in the time of their life when they wanted just simply to just dissolve into a ball of tears. That's when Jesus comes and calls your name and says, I'm alive. Don't worry. It's all going to be all right. It may not work out the way that you would think it will. It may not always be that I'll answer every prayer the way you want it to be there. But I will be there on time, and it will be all right. That's Easter. Don't get fooled, Jesus tells us, by the darkness. Don't get fooled by the things that seem to be so hopeless. Don't get fooled when evil seems to be winning in the world around us. That's all the darkness. Jesus was risen in the darkness. All of this was so much better put by another pastor in another church called the Mount Carmel Baptist Church in West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was recorded by a fellow named Tony Campolo. Some of you might be familiar with him. And he tells about what happened that day. That's Easter Sunday in that church. He says, for an hour and a half, the preacher preached one line over and over again. For an hour and a half, he stood the crowd on its ear with one line, and that line was, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That statement might not blow you away, but you should have heard him do it. He started his sermon real softly by saying, it was Friday. It was Friday, and Jesus was dead on the tree, but that was Friday, and Sunday's coming. And one of the deacons called out, preach, brother, and it was all the encouragement he needed. He came on louder as he said, it was Friday, and Mary was crying her eyes out. The disciples were running in every direction like sheep without a shepherd, and that was Friday, and Sunday's coming. The preacher kept going. He picked up the volume still more and he shouted, it was Friday. The cynics were looking at the world and saying, as things have been, so shall they be. You might as well just accept things the way they are. But that was Friday. And Sunday's coming. It was Friday, and on Friday, Pilate thought he had washed his hands of a whole lot of trouble, and the Pharisees were strutting around laughing and poking each other in the ribs. They thought they were in charge of things, but they didn't know that it was only Friday. Sunday's coming. The writer said, by the time the preacher had come to the end of the message, I was exhausted. He had me so worked up that I couldn't have stood it much longer. At the end of his message, he just yelled at the top of his lungs, it's Friday! And all 500 of us in that church yelled back with one accord. But Sunday's coming! Well, I might not be as eloquent or as long-winded as that fellow, but I want to add my own 2 cents in the spirit of what that preacher said. Maybe it's Friday in your life. On the Fridays of our lives, we are feeling that we are hanging on a cross, our own cross, racked with pain and what might seem like the futility of our lives. Or on the Friday of our lives, we might feel like Mary, taken over by our worst fears, imagining ourselves forsaken and alone, wondering if we can endure the loss. Or on the Fridays of our lives, we might feel like Judas, like there is no hope, and that we have nothing left to offer, and that there is no hope for redemption, no future that we could care to imagine. We might as well end it all right now. But friends, let's not get fooled. Because Friday is not the end of the story. God's not finished. And church, you know by now that while it is maybe Friday in your life, Sunday's coming. Sunday's coming.